There is a place in the world with its own government, its own army, its own currency, its own elections, and millions of citizens who proudly call it their homeland. Its people carry passports. Its leaders run a functioning state. Its cities are filled with businesses, universities, and busy streets. Yet, according to most of the world, this country does not exist. If you open many official maps, you will never find its name. Airlines rarely list it as a destination. Most international organizations do not recognize it. And to the global political system, it is still considered part of another country entirely. But on the ground, the reality is completely different. This place operates like a fully independent nation, collects taxes, controls its borders, it elects presidents, it runs its own economy, and perhaps the most fascinating part of this story is this. While the country it technically belongs to has struggled with decades of instability and conflict, this unrecognized nation has managed to build something surprisingly rare in the region: relative peace and stability. The country we are talking about is Somaliland, and its story is one of the most unusual political mysteries in the modern world. To understand how an entire country could exist without recognition, we have to go back more than a century, to the age of colonial empires. In the late 1800s, European powers were racing to divide Africa among themselves in what historians call the Scramble for Africa. During this time, the northern region of present-day Somalia became a British protectorate known as British Somaliland. Meanwhile, the southern part of the territory was controlled by Italy and became Italian Somaliland. For decades, the two regions were governed separately by different colonial powers, developing different administrative systems and political structures. Then in 1960, something historic happened. British Somaliland gained independence from the United Kingdom. For a brief moment in history, the territory actually existed as its own internationally recognized country. But that independence lasted only a few days. Soon after gaining freedom, the leaders of British Somaliland made a bold decision. They voluntarily united with Italian Somaliland to form a new country, Somalia. The dream was simple. Two regions, once divided by colonial rule, would come together as one unified nation. At first, the idea seemed hopeful, but over time, that dream began to fall apart. Political tensions started to grow between the north and the south. Many people in the northern region began to feel that power and resources were being concentrated in the southern capital. Their voices, they believed, were being ignored. Then things took a much darker turn. In 1969, a military officer named Syed Barre seized power in Somalia through a coup. His regime would go on to rule the country for more than 2 decades. And during that time, political repression and violence escalated across the nation. But nowhere would the consequences be felt more strongly than in the northern regions, the area that would later become Somaliland. By the late 1980s, tensions had exploded into open conflict. Cities were bombed. Entire communities were displaced. Thousands of civilians lost their lives as the government attempted to crush resistance movements in the north. One of the most devastating moments came in 1988, when the northern city of Hargeisa was heavily bombed. At the time, it was one of the largest cities in the region. But after the attacks, much of it lay in ruins. For many people living in the north, this moment changed everything. The idea of remaining part of Somalia no longer seemed possible. Then, in 1991, the government of Syed Barre collapsed. Somalia plunged into chaos. Warlords fought for control. The central government disappeared. The country descended into one of the longest periods of state collapse in modern history. But in the north, something very different happened. Local leaders, elders, and community representatives gathered to decide the future of their region. And in that moment, they made a decision that would shape the next 3 decades. They declared independence. The territory that had once been British Somaliland would once again become its own nation. That new state would be called Somaliland. But unlike in 1960, the international community did not recognize it. And that is where the real mystery begins. Because despite the lack of recognition, Somaliland would go on to build something the rest of Somalia could not: a functioning country. When Somaliland declared independence in 1991, It faced a challenge almost no country in modern history had ever experienced. It had no international recognition, no access to global financial institutions, no membership in the United Nations, no official diplomatic relationships with most of the world. In theory, the country should have collapsed almost immediately, yet something unexpected happened. Instead of falling into chaos like much of Somalia, the people of Somaliland began building a new political system from the ground up. But they did not copy Western democracies exactly. Instead, they blended modern institutions with traditional leadership structures. Clan elders, who had long played a role in local governance, became central to peace negotiations. Community leaders organized large conferences across the region where rival groups met to resolve disputes. These meetings lasted weeks, sometimes months. But they worked. Slowly, weapons were surrendered, militias were dissolved, and a fragile peace began to take shape. By the mid-1990s, Somaliland had established the basic foundations of a functioning state. A constitution was drafted, government ministries were created, security forces were organized, and most importantly, the region remained relatively stable while much of Somalia continued to struggle with war and political fragmentation. Then came another major step. In 2001, Somaliland held a national referendum. Millions of citizens voted on a new constitution that formally confirmed Somaliland as an independent republic. The result was overwhelming. More than 90% of voters supported independence. But despite this democratic process, the international community still refused to recognize the new state. The reasons were complicated. Many governments feared that recognizing Somaliland could encourage other separatist movements across Africa. Others worried it could destabilize already fragile borders on the continent. So officially, Somaliland remained part of Somalia. But inside the territory, life continued as if it were a fully independent nation. The capital city, Hargeisa, began rebuilding after the devastation of the late 1980s. New businesses appeared, markets reopened, universities and schools were established. And perhaps most surprisingly, Somaliland began holding competitive elections. Presidents were elected, opposition parties campaigned, political debates filled the streets and television broadcasts. In a region often associated with instability, Somaliland had created one of the more democratic political systems in the Horn of Africa. But even with these achievements, the lack of international recognition created enormous challenges. Because without recognition, Somaliland cannot access many of the tools that normal countries rely on. For example, it cannot receive direct loans from major global institutions like the World Bank, cannot easily sign international treaties, and its passport is accepted in only a limited number of countries. This means that Somaliland must find creative ways to operate in the global system. And one of the most fascinating examples of this creativity can be seen in its economy. Despite limited resources and global isolation, Somaliland has developed a surprisingly resilient economic system. Livestock exports form a major part of the economy, particularly trade with countries in the Middle East. Every year, millions of goats, sheep, and camels are shipped across the Red Sea to markets in Saudi Arabia and other Gulf nations. But perhaps the most important economic lifeline comes from something else entirely. Money sent home by Somalilanders living abroad. The diaspora community plays a huge role in supporting the economy. Workers in Europe, North America, and the Middle East send billions of dollars back to family members each year. These remittances help fund businesses, education, healthcare, and everyday life. In many ways, the Somaliland economy runs on the strength of its global community. And yet, even with these achievements, one major question continues to hang over the country. If Somaliland has its own government, its own elections, its own borders, and its own economy, why does the world still refuse to recognize it? And what would happen if that recognition finally came? Because the answer to that question could reshape politics across the entire region. For more than 3 decades, Somaliland has existed in one of the strangest positions in international politics. It operates like a country, but legally it is still considered part of Somalia. This unusual situation has created a paradox. On one hand, Somaliland has built relative peace, functioning institutions, and democratic elections. On the other hand, the global system continues to treat it as if it were simply a regional administration inside Somalia. But behind this political stalemate lies something far more important than most people realize. Location. Somaliland sits along one of the most strategically important waterways on Earth, the Gulf of Aden. This narrow stretch of water connects the Indian Ocean to the Red Sea and eventually to the Suez Canal. Every year, tens of thousands of ships pass through this corridor. Oil tankers, cargo vessels, and military fleets all travel through these waters on their way between Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Whoever controls ports along this route holds enormous strategic influence. And Somaliland controls one of the most important ports in the region, the port city of Berbera. For years, Berbera was a quiet coastal town, but in recent times it has become the center of growing international attention. Major investments have begun flowing into the port. New infrastructure projects have expanded its capacity, and global companies have started seeing Berbera as a potential trade hub for East Africa. One of the most significant investments came from DP World, a global port operator based in the United Arab Emirates. The company signed a major agreement to modernize and expand Berbera's port facilities. The goal is ambitious: to transform Berbera into a major logistics gateway, connecting international shipping routes to the markets of East Africa. But trade is not the only reason global powers are watching Somaliland more closely. Military strategy also plays a role. Countries around the world are increasingly interested in securing access to ports near the Gulf of Aden. The region has long been affected by piracy, geopolitical competition, and strategic rivalries. Having access to stable coastal territory in this region is extremely valuable. And Somaliland offers something rare in this part of the Horn of Africa: stability. While other parts of Somalia continue to struggle with political fragmentation and security challenges, Somaliland has maintained relative calm. That stability has quietly made it attractive to foreign investors and strategic partners. Yet despite these developments, official recognition still has not come. The international community continues to hesitate. Many governments worry that recognizing Somaliland could set a precedent for other breakaway regions around the world. Across Africa, national borders were largely drawn during the colonial era. If one region successfully breaks away and gains recognition, others might try to follow. That possibility makes many governments cautious. So Somaliland remains stuck in a diplomatic gray zone, too stable to ignore, but too politically complicated to fully recognize. Still, the people of Somaliland continue to build their country. Elections are held. Businesses open. Students graduate from universities. Life moves forward. And in the streets of Hargeisa, millions of citizens live as if their country already exists, because to them it does. Their passports may not be widely accepted. Their flag may not fly at the United Nations. But their identity is real. Their institutions are real. And their country, whether the world recognizes it or not, continues to function every single day. Which leaves one final question. If a nation has a government, a population, a defined territory, and the ability to govern itself, does it really need recognition to exist? Or has Somaliland already become the world's most successful country that officially doesn't exist? Stories like this remind us that the world map is not as simple as it looks. Behind the borders we see on paper are hidden histories, forgotten nations, and political mysteries that most people never hear about. If you enjoy discovering these kinds of untold global stories, make sure you subscribe to Country Mystery, because there are many more countries, secrets, and geopolitical puzzles waiting to be uncovered. And in the next investigation, we might explore another place that challenges everything you thought you knew about the world map. Until then, stay curious. Globe showing Europe, Africa.